because it's been a long time since I've spoken in front of a crowd. And about 10 or 13 years ago, I was invited to speak about the innovation that I was part of in Canada, and some of the really exciting things that young people were doing with food and intergenerational conversations, and a way that the city could live and create from a place of intergenerational, intercultural solidarity. It was very, very exciting, but I realized that I was asked to speak from my light. And that actually, people only wanted to hear the good stories, and they only wanted to hear about the huge potential and the positive aspects of what we were doing. And I was very willing to do that, because I was actually only comfortable with the light. I realize now that part of that light in me was also my shadow. And in these last years, I've been in a much more close relationship with my dark places, and with some of the darkness and some of the more difficult things in life and in the world. And so I've actually been in quite a subterranean place. I've been in a kind of dark night of the soul for quite a long time, and Claire has been calling me out. So this is the first time I've spoken in a very long time, and my heart is beating. But I also feel that some of being in the dark place, or dark nights of the soul, is a period of confusion, and a period of really not knowing who I am anymore, and how things work. And even though a lot of the work that we do in the world, in Greece, in Israel and Palestine, in Egypt, and in places where things are collapsing, a lot of the work that we do is to bring the light and the dark together. And I can only do that if I know my own dark places. So in these last years, I moved to Jerusalem in 2009, and it was my first time living in a conflict zone, a so-called conflict zone, and it was the first time that I met my own inner checkpoints, so to speak, in a place where I couldn't relate to the precariousness of life and death, because I come from Canada, and we don't live in that same context. And so there's been a journey for me moving into the dark soil, the fertile soil of being in the not knowing, being in the unknown, being in the unpredictability of life. And it's been quite a rite of passage, but I realized that that rite of passage has been parallel alongside many of the collective places that are also asking some of these questions. Who am I? What are we doing? Who am I becoming? Who are we becoming? So I remember calling my mother once from Greece when we had just been in the middle of all the protests, and we've been working with these beautiful young people who want to rebuild Greece in a very aligned and meaningful way to who they are and what they believe in. And I was talking to my mother, and she said to me, she said, "Oh, don't worry, sweetie, don't worry. Of course you're wobbly. Whole continents are wobbly. And it's really, really okay." And I thought, oh, okay, my mother is telling me that it's really okay to be really wobbly, and that she too, from her perch in Toronto at the time, could see that the whole world was wobbly. But I would say that the most intimate rite of passage into the darkness has been with my own family. And this time last year, my mother was diagnosed with a bloom of cancers in her organs and in her brain. And what it asked of us as a family was to respond to what was real, and to be with the uncertainty of what that kind of journey could bring us. And my mother taught me and taught us many, many things that I think are very connected to the things that we're actually asking and learning in the bigger picture with the collective. And one was, the first thing that we did, she said, I want to write to all our friends and family, and I want them to know what's happening. And so we sent an email out, and immediately friends and family and people from all over the world started to send messages, brought us food. But what they did was they were witnessing my mother's life. They were telling her while she was alive what it meant for them to have been in relationship with her. They witnessed her life, they witnessed the things that she created, they witnessed who she was and the impact they had on her. And a lot of the work that we're doing in the world is around participatory processes. And I started to realize that my mother, from her bed with my son, the bloom of cancer, was actually she was initiating a participatory process of dying. And it was an absolutely extraordinary thing, because what it activated was people's own relationship with their fear with death, but also with the glory and the celebration of life. And And so in inviting others to join us in this process, we actually saw a web of life and love activated that was invisible to us before, and it was activated throughout the world. A friend of ours from Afghanistan wrote to us from a tiny village, and he wrote to my mother, and he said, in our culture, in the Afghan culture, the gates of heaven are at the feet of the parents. The gates of heaven open at the feet of the parents. And I read this to my mother, and she said, "Oh, I feel like I'm part of the world." And I said, "You are. You've actually connected people who haven't known each other. Through your condition, you've actually invited us to see each other more, let alone to see her." So there's a huge act of witnessing in this moment. The other thing that I saw my mother do is that she partnered with her cancer. She wasn't fighting it, she wasn't hating it, she wasn't blaming it. She saw that there was a new participant in her life and in her body, and in our life and in our body as a family. And she partnered with it. She found a new balance within herself. And I'd never seen anything like that. I'd never seen someone accept so quickly, or so, not quickly, so meaningfully, something that might be the greatest fear. And it was, how do we partner with the things we fear the most so that we can become more, so that it can teach us? And I saw this extraordinary partnership with her body, and that we weren't to unbalance this body and this new partnership. We were actually to learn with it and to move with it. The other thing, which I thought was extraordinary, was I think there was at one point where my mother made a choice about how she wanted to die, and that we as a family were suddenly in a palliative situation, and that she was in a big process of deciding how she could choose to be in this. And for me, it was an incredible relationship between will and surrender. The huge act of will it takes to surrender to life, to surrender to what is given. And it's not a surrender like a flop or a collapse. It's a surrender into just simply not knowing and being in that in every moment. And we as a family suddenly were on a journey every single day of just not knowing, but being really present to it. And that was a very new thing for me, to think about will and surrender and the dance of these opposites, or seeming opposites. There was another dance of opposites between grief and celebration. As we can see my mother moving into another state, there was a huge celebration at the same time happening of her life. And they were dancing together every single moment. So the paradoxes were something that were really hard to understand, but actually when we started to learn how to dance with them, it felt very rich. The other thing that I started to see with this is one of the greatest democracies we have is the democracy of death, that everyone will go on this journey. And collectively, we're in many situations where there's a great democracy of that which is dying. And it's happening in our organizations, it's happening in governance systems, it's happening all over the place. And one of the experiences I've had in the last years was actually to take an organization into a beautiful death, and we called it a conscious closure. And I had been hired as an innovator, and suddenly I was faced with the question, well, what does it mean truly to be sustainable as an organization? It was an international yoga magazine, it was renowned, it was at its peak. But when we really looked at where it was in its life cycle, we saw that it had completed its vision and its mission in that form. And suddenly, as a leader, I was in this position of bringing something to its end. And I thought, well, does that mean I'm not a good leader? Does that mean that this is a failure? What will people think? And then we realized as an organization that this was an incredible opportunity to set an example of how to do this collectively, how to do a practice of consciously closing something, because we could do that. Sometimes we're not given the choice to bring things to a close, it happens to us. But when we do have the choice, it's actually an incredible experience of learning. And I had to let go of my identity of something really that I held to, that being an innovator meant that you were always creating something new. And actually, in looking at the life cycles and looking at the deep soil of being in that transformational alchemy of letting something go, that's where the new is born. And so to not go through and to not honor, to not be in the fullness of those aspects of life is actually to forget some of the most extraordinary intelligence that we have in us, which is about being in the not knowing, being in the mystery, and letting it feed us, letting it teach us. So being here in Ireland, I've only been here for a few days, but I think that this question, what is the rite of passage for Ireland at this time? What if we were to also consciously close that which is ready to die? What if we were to do it with the full celebration and the full joy and the sorrow of letting those things go? What if we were to participate and ask all of life to participate with us in that? What if we partnered with that which we feared the most? What if we partnered with what we think of as cancers, but actually they are a form of life? What if we were to willfully surrender to that which is and see where it takes us? And what if we were to really, really celebrate the fullness of the cycles of life? There's a beautiful concept or practice in Judaism that I've been learning about by living in Jerusalem called tikkun. And tikkun means repair. And that we've come onto this earth as a fragment of light, a fragment of the broken vessel, to do tikkun, to repair, to find through our brokenness the other aspects of our light and move into wholeness. And there's a concept called tikkun olam, and olam means the world. And so we've actually come to do our repair and our deep transformation of our souls in service to the world soul. And when we do that in service to the world soul, we're also repairing ourselves. So this concept for me is something to do with being in relationship with the light and the dark. And I'm reminded of one of your great poets, John O'Donohue, who writes about a neglected beauty is at the heart of this global crisis. A neglected beauty is at the heart of this global crisis. And for me, the relationship with death and the dying is actually a neglected beauty. And if we could be in a relationship with that beauty, with the fear and the suffering and the pain and the glory of it, I think there would be a new kind of life force that we would be in touch with. And I just wanted to read you one little thing that I found that I wrote, and it's called Be Your Maps. And I think the journey into death is part of the maps that we need to rediscover. I found paths to here and there, met people from here and there, gone outward to go inward. I've grown and died many times. All around me are who, what, why, wonder. There is what I know and just don't know and will never know. Is the map already made only to be discovered, or is it waiting for my next step? My slow tears, salty sweet, the blood in my womb to open, the ley lines of my soul's geography, the ley lines of the soul of the world. There are very old things in the birthing of the new. There are very old things in the birthing of the new. Thank you.